Hello again. Welcome to Southeastern 14. I am Chris Lee. I'm joined by Blake Lovell and Max Barr. We are here to preview 5 SEC games for this weekend's action. Those are Georgia at Florida, Missouri at South Carolina, Tennessee at Vanderbilt, Kentucky at Arkansas. We've done that one. LSU at Alabama, and Ole Miss at Texas A&M. If you want to see Kentucky and Arkansas, if you'd like to see Auburn and Mississippi State, those two games have their separate videos, leaving us with 5 left to do. Before we go to those games, we remind you that this video is brought to you by BetOnline. It's NFL playoff time. The road to Vegas goes through San Francisco and Baltimore. BetOnline is your number one source for playoff odds, stats, trends, and lines, with everything from point spreads to hundreds of player performance props. Head to BetOnline today. Stay updated on all the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. We will start with the first game on the slate. That is Georgia's road trip to Gainesville to take on the Florida Gators. You can see that one 11 Central on ESPN2. We come up with an estimated spread. I think sometimes these aren't on point. The computers between BPI, Bart Torvik, and Ken Pomeroy have Florida an 8.5-point favorite with a 77% chance to win. I think we probably feel that line will be closer to maybe 6.5, Max?
Yeah, 6.5, 7.5, I'm expecting.
Yeah, so we don't think it'll be 8.5 when it comes out. And as we're doing this on Friday morning, it has not come out. Georgia comes off a buzzer-beating win. Well, not buzzer-beating. That hit a putback with 2 seconds left and then held on for dear life as Jordan Wright had a 3, I think, rim out. So Georgia picks up another win. The Bulldogs have just been really consistent this year. Florida has not necessarily been consistent, but our knock on the Gators was they didn't win the big games. Well, guess what? Florida has played its best game the last time out. I don't know, maybe as well as Florida's played under Todd Golden the last 2 years, or pretty close to it, in a very impressive victory over Mississippi State, which the Gators needed. Like, two teams playing at pretty nice levels. Georgia is pretty formidable on the road, as we've seen at times. Doesn't always win, and the Gators now maybe looking to kick their gear or their game into a different gear with that win over Mississippi State.
Yeah, but I think the difference here is Florida's been pretty consistent at home. And they lost the game to Kentucky, but I think we'd all agree they played really well against Kentucky. And, that was a game they should have won, in all honesty. And so, yeah, Florida hadn't looked great in the 2 road games they played in SEC play at Ole Miss or Tennessee, but they've looked pretty good at home, coming off the one you just talked about against Mississippi State. So Georgia's been good on the road too, but I think this, may be a bit of a challenge against this Florida team that, again, finally just sort of feeling like they got a somewhat big win over Mississippi State. And now I think they come into this one feeling pretty confident about themselves, because remember, that came off the road win at Missouri too, where, like we say, anybody getting a road win in this league's hard to do. So they've played some pretty good basketball, a couple, games in a row here. And I think when you just keep kind of zoning in on the balance, I think you can get from Florida with their, and really, like you said, it's kind of at times come without Riley Kugel even being part of that group. But just the way the guards are playing, and I think that, to me, will probably be the difference in this game, is the Florida's guard play. And, Tyrese Samuel, obviously someone I'm very high on. And to me, this feels like a pretty good spot for Florida, even as well as Georgia's played. I don't expect this to be, by any means a game that gets out of hand one way or the other in the Mike White Bowl. But I don't know, just for some reason, I feel like this is a pretty good spot for a Florida team, even against a Georgia team that has certainly done a lot of good things at this point.
2 of my favorite guards in the conference going head-to-head right here. Demery against Pullen. I cannot wait for this matchup. Demery, second in the conference in fouls drawn. He's shooting about 9 free throws a game over the past 4 games. Then you look at Pullen, 23 assists to only 4 turnovers in SEC play. He's got 0 turnovers in his last 70 minutes on the court. Just 2 guards that are playing some of their best basketball, leading both of their teams right now. Cannot wait for that matchup. When you look at this Georgia team, kind of a hard team to to figure out if you haven't been watching the games. This is a team that scores a lot from 3 and the free throw line. They don't do all too much from the mid-range and around the rim. And when you look at how that matches up against this Florida defense, it's kind of like opposites. The Florida defense is first in the conference in amount of it's called 3-point rate, but amount of 3-point attempts that have been taken on them, they have the least. They run people off the 3-point line. They do not give up a lot of threes, and they have the second best 3-point percentage defense in the conference. So they have been very good at defending the 3, something that Georgia has leaned on a lot. And then free throws is the other thing. Georgia has the highest free throw rate in the conference. A lot of that is Demery, who's just been getting there at will. And this is a Florida defense that hasn't put teams on the line all too much. So I think that the areas that Georgia usually attacks are the areas that Florida usually takes away. So I'll be interested to see how the Georgia offense plays on the road here. And then also, I believe one of you are about to talk about it, but the rebounding. And we've been mentioning that with Florida almost every game now. So that's another area that Florida can really assert themselves. Chris Jan said that he had a lot of trouble dealing with the Florida front court and had to play Tolu Smith and Jimmy Bell at the same time. So if Mississippi State couldn't handle the Florida front court, I imagine Georgia will have a tough time too. I agree with Blake, and I think this is a bit of a tough matchup and a tough spot here for Georgia. What do you think, Chris?
Well, the rebounding thing you brought up, I know the stat you're referring to. Florida, number 3 in the country, offensive rebounding rate, 40.4%. Georgia, not very good at protecting the glass, 227, 30.3%. Florida's a little bit like A&M offensively, except I think it's got more talent across the board just in terms of putting the ball in the basket. Does it have a Wade Taylor? No. But I think it's got Will Richard and some guys like that are supporting pieces that you really need to have a good team. But look, my pick is really simple. It's the rebounding thing, but it's really not that. I just think Florida's more talented and Florida's at home, and sometimes you keep it simple, and that's why I'm going with the Gators.
Yeah, it's fairly simple for me too, and I don't want to overlook Georgia here at all. I mean, this is a team that can get to the free throw line at will. They are super aggressive, so they definitely have paths to victory. And Silas Demery is playing as good as any guard in the SEC right now. But I think that the bench shooting slumps for Georgia. Justin Hill hasn't hit a 3 in 4 games. Blue Kane hasn't hit a 3 in 3 games. And they're really going to need that. So I just think the consistency at home, like Blake mentioned, is going to be a big factor here for Florida, and just to get that bit of mental confidence after finally winning a big game. Give me Florida here at home.
Georgia has the size to match up with Florida, but I just think Florida's guards are the difference in this one. So give me the Gators.
Next up, South Carolina and Missouri. This one in Gainesville, in the Columbia, the South Carolina version of Columbia, if I'm correct. So in any case, you catch on the SEC Network, noon Central. South Carolina is going to be about an 8.5 to 9 point favorite. If you believe the computers, Max, you might have that maybe a point lower in your best guess at it. This is an interesting game because South Carolina has probably not had a win in years as big as the one it got in just a kind of a destruction of Kentucky in Columbia. And South Carolina's not used to, I think, have to come off a win with something at the kind of level of stakes. And it's been a long time. This is usually kind of a letdown spot for teams, I feel like. Although I feel like Lamont Paris's guys have brought it just about night in and night out. So I don't know how big of a concern that is. Missouri, despite the winless conference record, continues to hang in there. The Tigers just don't have enough guys. Frankly, Tamar Bates has kind of been carrying that team along with Sean East. Foul trouble sunk Missouri, but the Tigers still hung in and nearly won a game that they probably had no business winning under the circumstance last time out. Max, how do you size this one up?
This is another tough matchup because at the surface, you think letdown spot for South Carolina after the heroic win, the amazing win that kind of took us by storm. over Kentucky. So you have that emotional letdown type of factor coming into it, and you have a Missouri team that's just as desperate as it can get. So there's a little bit of nerves there if you're looking at it from a South Carolina side, but when you dive into the numbers, I mean, this is just it's a bad matchup for Missouri due to the free throw line, in my opinion. This is a Missouri offense that, and Dennis Gates has just been all over it in almost every press conference. He says they don't get to the line enough. They just do not shoot free throws. They're dead last in the SEC. And this is a South Carolina defense that does not put teams on the line at all. They are number one in the conference in fouls committed. They just do not foul. So, and then you look at the flip side of that. Missouri's the worst free throw rate defense. They foul the most out of anyone. So when you have a tempo that's going to be this slow, you have two of the slowest offenses in the SEC, and Missouri's not going to, well, they could, you never know, but they're not a team that has really shot the lights out and been able to really lean on the 3-point shot. So you think in a slow, grindy, half-court game, free throws are going to become a factor, and I see a massive, massive edge to South Carolina in that department. So, yeah, that's what I'm seeing on the surface.
Yeah, I mean, Missouri is one of the few teams that can match South Carolina from just having older guys with experience, but I mean, it hasn't worked out great to this point. I mean, again, they've not won an SEC game. Like we said, the schedule, this is kind of their opportunity. Not this one, probably, because, again, they're quite an underdog here. But the next two games, home against Arkansas at Vanderbilt, are probably their best opportunities to get off to zero in the win column. And so, yeah, just look, maybe Missouri keeps this close because, I mean, they've been right there with a chance, right, in some of these games they played. And if you go back to the previous game they played, which it feels like forever ago now, but really wasn't. It was 2 weeks ago. The overtime game in the other Columbia. I mean, that was kind of something where you looked at it and it was South Carolina had some extra opportunities with 15 offensive rebounds. They turned it over quite a bit in that game. So I think that's crucial for Missouri. Can they force the same kind of turnovers? I mean, South Carolina had 16 turnovers. Missouri only had 7. So you got to take advantage of your opportunities, but Missouri couldn't do that in the previous game. They went 5 of 22 from 3, which has been kind of a theme. We've said they just have not had that extra gear offensively. They went 12 of 18 from the free throw line. And again, 67%, but you think about it, in a game you lose by 2 in overtime. So it's been those little things that all just kind of have added up to this sort of miserable SEC season for Missouri so far. But I mean, look, I'm curious to see what differences we see from the last game. Again, it feels like forever ago, but we know South Carolina's playing really well coming off that Kentucky game. But I think it's also fair to ask the question, like we mentioned with other people, is there a little bit of a, it's not going to be the atmosphere it was in the Kentucky game. It's going to be a little bit different. And so, because you're playing a team that hasn't won a game in the SEC. So I mean, it's a tough spot for Missouri, but I would just, again, keep in mind that these two teams did play an overtime game 2 weeks ago. And Missouri was up, 6 midway through the second half in that game, but South Carolina just made the plays down the stretch and got the win with, once again, the big guys sort of stepping up. Michi Johnson didn't even have a good game there. 5 points, 5 turnovers. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
All right, picks. And I think this is only the second rematch game that I remember that we've had in the league. I know we've had LSU and A&M play twice. That one, I think LSU won by 15 at A&M. You figure, hey, you handle a team on its court, you got a pretty good shot at winning the rematch. LSU got beat. So take nothing for granted. And again, Missouri has held teams close. It's hung in there against just about everybody, even some of the games with the scoring that more lopsided. Missouri at some point in the second half was competitive with the chance to win if things broke right. They just didn't. And speaking of things not breaking right, Missouri's been a little bit unlucky. Opponents have hit 76% of foul shots, 348th in the country. Nothing Missouri can do to control that. So the Tigers, just a team in need of a break on top of everything. Look, we kind of doubted Carolina without Miles Studi, excuse me. Max Studi, that might stick.
I do have a nice 3-point shot.
Good. Well, we might need to see it at some point. But anyway, yeah, look, South Carolina has been taking care of business. Do I fear a little bit of a letdown against a team that doesn't give up? Yeah. But I think Carolina handles it. That's the pick. Max, your pick.
Yeah, I think a major factor in this game, obviously, as you just said, Max Studi is going to be out. His replacement at the 3, the past 2 games, his replacement has been either Talon Cooper has played the 3, or it's been Zachary Davis. Those are the 2 best perimeter defenders South Carolina has. Who does Missouri play at the 3? Pretty much 90% of the time, it's Tamar Bates. So tough matchup there from one of Missouri's best scorers, but that also opens up mismatches for Sean East. So I think Sean East is actually going to be able to kind of do his thing in this game and get to his spots. And with a game where you have 2 of the slowest tempos and a team coming off of a miracle spot, I really, really want to pick Missouri here. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm picking South Carolina, but might just be an against the spread play for me because I really like the spot here that Missouri's in. I think Sean East is going to be in for a big game. I'm liking Missouri, but I'm going to take South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, we're not just saying this because it's South Carolina. If it was anybody else, we would say this is kind of your typical letdown spot. Based on the last game, we've seen it all across college basketball. This isn't, again, a South Carolina thing. And remember, they do go to Tennessee next Tuesday in a huge matchup. But, yeah, I'm not picking against Dad here. Give me Lamont Paris and Gamecocks.
Next up, Tennessee's trip to Vanderbilt. 5 Central in the backyard of one Blake Lovell and myself. SEC Network, Tennessee is about probably a 17 to 17.5 point favorite, according to the computers. Max, you think the line will be a couple points lower?
Yeah, I bet it opens up at like 14.5 or 15, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But to open up at 17 is pretty wide.
Yeah, point is you rarely see a game this lopsided in the computers on somebody else's home court. Tennessee a 94% chance to win. Now look, Vanderbilt beat Tennessee a year ago, same venue. But that Vanderbilt team was a lot better than this one. Again, Blake and I are in Nashville. The vibe around Vanderbilt is awful. That is a program with some history and tradition. I've never seen morale lower. I know people that aren't going to go to the game that are season ticket holders. You're starting to hear people that you never thought would say things like, I'm fine with selling my tickets to opposing fans and even hoping that the team loses in order to get a coaching change. That's the point that things are at Vanderbilt, which is a horrible spot to put your players in. Look, Vanderbilt has played a lot of teams tough. I mean, there's not been a game that with 10 minutes to play in the conference that maybe there wasn't a shot to win if things went right, but the roster's just not very good. I would bet that Tennessee is going to have a 2-1 fan advantage in that building Saturday, which is just unthinkable if you grew up in this area and went to games. Blake, just not a good spot for Vandy at all here.
No, doesn't seem that way. Yeah, I mean, Tennessee has just been the better team by far. We could do all the analysis we wanted to, but I mean, it's just kind of a simple matter of you just don't know what you're going to get with Vanderbilt. I mean, we've said it. I mean, for them to do what they need to do, they've got to have the perfect game plan. They've got to have more than just 2 guys, step up. And in fairness to them, they have at times, whether it's, Rivera Torres or someone else. But it's just Tennessee's a different challenge. And it's the same stuff I say all the time with Tennessee. They're just not a team you can prepare for with the way they play defense. And Vanderbilt offensively has just not been good. 3-point shot has been a non-factor. And if they're going to try to get all their points on Tennessee inside the arc, it's going to be a challenge with the way they play defense. Because, again, they just push you so far out and they make you uncomfortable. And, I mean, look, if there is something I will say, though, it's a completely different scenario than it was last year. But, Lawrence played well against Tennessee last year. Mannion, I think, I'm trying to remember what He didn't score a lot last year, but
I'll look it up.
well, I know Lawrence had a big game because obviously he's the one that made the shot, right, to win it. But again, to me, this is just a completely different scenario based on kind of where the two teams are at. Like that last year, that was Vanderbilt in the middle of kind of starting the run at that point. But this year, it's just we've not seen enough from them to feel like they're going to be able to do that. One thing I will also add, if you really look at Vanderbilt, I mean, they've kept some of these games close, like closer than you would think. Not, I know 13's like, okay, 13 here, 13 there, whatever. But if the spread is whatever it is, I'm not saying this from a betting standpoint, but like, would I be surprised if Vanderbilt kept this closer than anyone thought? No, because we've seen them do it before in this spot in Nashville. But if you're just going by the matchup basketball wise, pretty much everything seems to be in Tennessee's favor here.
Yeah, numbers wise, everything's going to be going towards the Vols. But when you look at it from a situational spot and home and away and how teams have been, one thing I'll note is that the largest spread in SEC play so far this year was Georgia at Kentucky. I believe Kentucky was a 14-point favorite, and Georgia ended up covering that spread. When you look at Tennessee's away games this year, they won at Wisconsin, won by 10. At North Carolina, lost by 8. At Mississippi State, lost by 5. At Georgia, won thanks to Dalton Connect miracle down the stretch, won by 6. So they have not beaten a team by more than 10 points on the road yet. All those teams are higher in the rankings than Vanderbilt, but still the point, just trying to make the point there for how, Tennessee has won on the road, but they haven't been doing it by much. I think this is going to be a game where you're going to have to get a 3 or 2 from Tassos. You're going to have to get a few threes from JRT. You're going to have everyone play their best game and shoot really well, which, they're capable of doing. But if you just look at the numbers, rebounding, shooting percentage, anything, Tennessee's going to have the edge everywhere. Could there be some rust from not playing for a week? Maybe, maybe the game starts out slow and it stays slow and it stays close and you never know. But yeah, I mean, spread's going to be double digits and all the numbers are going to tell you to go towards Tennessee.
One more thing we didn't mention. I remember, I think Blake was probably standing beside me last year at the SEC tournament. You get to see these guys up close. And I just remember watching Tennessee walk by. It looked like a football team, how big these guys are. I mean, it looked like they were a bunch of 6'7" rush ends. I just think with Adu and James and those guys, Vanderbilt is going to have fits with the team that's that muscular and physical. They weren't very good in the post, but with no Colin Smith, Van Allen Lubin has been hit and miss with injury. I presume he'll be there, but I just think it's a complete mismatch. My guess is Tennessee will be in control of this most of the way. I don't think it's going to be a 35-point blowout. My guess is Tennessee will be cruising in the second half with a 20-point lead. Maybe Vanderbilt makes a late charge, because one thing Jerry Stackhouse's teams do is they typically don't give up. And maybe Vanderbilt gets a late cover or something like that. Wouldn't shock me. But I just unless Lawrence and Magnon have out of their mind games. And by the way, Blake Magnon had 7 in that game a year ago, but it was efficient. He had 5 assists and no turnovers. Even with that, I don't think Vanderbilt's got enough to win. I think this is an easy Tennessee pick for all of us. I'll throw it to you, Max.
Yeah, easy Tennessee pick. I'm not picking against a double-digit spread. I'll go with Tennessee here.
Yeah, so again, never safe to pick the road team, but it's going to be essentially a home game for Tennessee. So I will pick the Vols in this one.
Next up, we have got LSU heading to Alabama.
Ooh.
Computers have Alabama by about 16.5 with a 92% chance to win. I think that number is high. We've seen LSU play well on the road. We know this is a team that's a lot like Georgia. It maybe not be top half of the SEC in talent, but just competes and is well coached. It's got experienced guards. Alabama is also coming off a very emotional game against Auburn. I mean, if you're looking for letdown spots, Blake, this would seem potentially to be one against a team that kind of has hung in there from what I remember against nearly everybody lately.
Yeah, this one would worry me if I was an Alabama fan, because I don't care what the computers say on this one, even though I back the computers for Alabama and Auburn. But I just think if it's 14 or 15 or something, that just feels way too high to me, based on the way LSU's played. Because I know LSU went to Auburn, like we said, and lost by 15. But remember, we talked about that game. LSU made the run to cut that thing down to whatever.
Mhm.
And obviously, Auburn scored a little bit late to get it back to 15. But they were right there on the comeback trail with a chance to make it even more interesting. And again, losing at Georgia on a shot that went in and came right back out. Nothing to be ashamed of there, the way Georgia's played. And so, yeah, I mean, we talk again, South Carolina's kind of in that spot. I think Alabama feels like they're in sort of a very similar scenario here, where it's you're playing a team that Missouri's obviously more desperate than LSU is, but I think LSU kind of feels a little bit of pressure here, knowing that maybe after that Georgia game, like we said, okay, you're back to 500. You got a really tough stretch coming up. Remember, it's not just this game, right? They play Arkansas at home the following Saturday, so they get the week off. But then after that, they got to go to Tennessee. They come back home to play Alabama. Then it's at Florida, at South Carolina. Like, your SEC record can spiral out of control in a hurry here if you're not able to steal one of these wins somewhere. And so, yeah, I think the way that LSU plays now with Jalen Cook, with Jordan Wright, even though Max has brought up Cook's numbers a little bit, and they're not what they were when he first came back, but yeah, I'm curious about this game. We'll see, if anyone decides to pick the upset, but I do think there is at least something about LSU in the spot against an Alabama team that is coming off, the biggest high of the season. So, yeah, I'm curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah, you have a team on top of the world going against a team that's lost 3 of its last 4. So, not even saying the team names, just a team that's lost 3 of its last 4 going against a team coming off the biggest win of its year. Just with that information, it makes me like the side that's lost 3 of its last 4. Now, it is at Alabama. Okay, and we saw LSU beat Texas A&M on the road, but they've lost back-to-back road games, Auburn and Georgia. And now the reason why I don't really like that Georgia result is because you shoot 43.5% from 3, you make 10 threes on the road, and you don't come away with the win. Now you don't have Tyrell Ward, you don't have Carlos Stewart, so you do it a little bit shorthanded, but still, when you shoot 43.5% on the road and your opponent shoots 29, it hurts to not come away with a win there. They did have 16 turnovers. Jalen Cook had more turnovers than assists again. And Will Baker with 5 turnovers is brutal from the center position. I will say this, though. I do not think we'll get 9 threes combined from Rylan Griffin and Latrell Wrightsell again. If we do, geez, hats off to them. But I don't think Alabama's going to shoot the lights out like they did last game. They're not going to be as emotionally up for this one. So I think that if we get a double-digit spread, I mean, Ken Palm's saying this thing's 89-75. That is wide. That's a wide spread. That's a blowout spread. Not only a blowout spread, like 15, 14 points they're saying this thing's going to be. Man, I mean, I like Alabama at home, but if we're talking from a betting standpoint, I think LSU is going to keep this thing close. They're desperate.
Yeah, I think we're all leaning the same way. I will take Alabama to win. Just too much talent, too much scoring balance. Alabama's got it like few teams in the country have. That, and at home, I'm going to take Alabama, but I think a double-digit spread seems like a lot. I see Alabama winning this one, maybe more like 6 to 8 points, given the way LSU has played, Max.
Yeah, and another thing to note, and well, I've already noted it, but just to put emphasis on it, is LSU doesn't have 2 of their guard backups, and in a game where they're going to be flying up and down, and with the pace that Alabama likes to put on you, we saw them put it on South Carolina in the second half. I mean, that it can just completely overwhelm teams. So there is that factor with an LSU shorthanded backcourt. So I think with that, just combined with it being at Alabama too, and I mean LSU's kind of coming off of an emotional letdown too. That Jordan Wright shot was halfway down. That one stings a little bit too. So I'm gonna take Alabama here to win outright. But man, if this thing opens like 14, 13 and a half, I think that's a wide margin for an LSU team that's desperate.
Yeah, it's tricky because Alabama is always capable of blowing someone out.
Yeah.
And, we saw that against South Carolina. We've seen it in other games. And I think it's just because they can score so quickly and, go on an 8-0 run in 40 seconds. It's tough because there is always that possibility. So I would want no part of this game from a betting standpoint. But yeah, I'm gonna pick the Tide in this one.
Last one, 7:30 Central SEC Network. Ole Miss visits Texas A&M. In what a weird matchup stylistically, gentlemen. First of all, the computers have no idea what to do with this game. I mean, usually you will see the computers are, maybe if something crazy, the computers would be 2 or 3 points off on a game. BPI has Texas A&M by 9.5 points. Bart Torvik has A&M by about 3. Ken Pomeroy has A&M by 6. I've not seen a discrepancy that big at this point in the season and not even close. Averages out to say Texas A&M just over a 6% favorite with about a 71% chance to win. Boys, this one, all right, listen to some of these numbers. We have talked a lot about Texas A&M's ability to offensive rebound. 43.7% of offensive rebounds does A&M grab. Ole Miss giving up 34.1%. Those numbers for A&M, number one in the country. Ole Miss 333rd in defensive rebounding, and that's in a bad way. Now, on the other hand, A&M is one of the worst teams in the country in terms of getting its shots blocked. 13.3% of the time when it has the ball, that's 354th. Ole Miss, second in the country in block rate, 16.7%. It's just bizarre. You would not expect to see a stat like that because a lot of times the guys that are blocking your shots are the same guys getting rebounds. But what a weird matchup with two teams that have been really weird lately. A&M just can't shoot. Ole Miss can shoot. Ole Miss can really shoot the three. All right, Blake.
Sure about that?
He's getting warmed up.
I'm sorry, but are we sure about that? Because I don't care what the numbers say. Here's what I see. I see a team that in its last road game went 4 of 17 from 3 for 23.5%. I see a team in the road game before that against LSU that went 6 of 24 for 25%. I see a team that went 6 of 16 against Tennessee, which is 37.5%, but it's not great by any means. Ole Miss is shooting well. They're shooting well at home. They're not shooting great on the road, and that's the difference here. Because to me, that is what stands out the most. Now, of course, you could go back to earlier in the season and say, well, they went 10 of 18 against Temple. What is it? They went 6 of 15 against UCF. That's great and all, but we're in SEC play now. And what I've seen is just not a lot of consistent shooting from Ole Miss in road games. And so I think that would be my concern here. If you're showing up for the 3-point shot, go find another game, because I don't think you're going to get that here between these two, no matter how different the numbers are, with Ole Miss being a top 20 team, 3-point percentage wise, and Texas A&M being one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the country. I don't know that we're going to get that drastic of a difference here, just based on, again, what Ole Miss has done on the road in SEC play so far. So that's just one thing I would add about this matchup. You guys said everything about the rebounding. It's just a huge advantage for Texas A&M from an offensive rebounding perspective. But to me, this feels like an absolute slog of a game where two teams are just going to, try to make the other team shoot a lot of threes. Because again, we can look at the percentages, but I still think that's not a bad idea for A&M to guard to where you're making Ole Miss try to take a lot of threes. Because again, I just don't know. Those numbers are coming back down. It's the law of averages, right? Yeah, they're starting to come back down to earth from a 3-point perspective. And so I'm curious to see how A&M game plans defensively because of that.
Well, the interesting thing about Ole Miss from 3 is that while they may shoot a decent percentage, they barely
shooting a
shoot the
lot.
three ball. They don't
Yep.
shoot it.
Yeah.
They're dead last in the SEC in 3-point rate. So I remember watching the Kentucky Texas A&M game that I think both of you guys took Kentucky and I took Texas A&M. My last win I can possibly remember. But I remember in that game, I remember going on Twitter during a halftime break or a commercial break, or maybe even before overtime, and one of the prominent Kentucky accounts said, "Man, Texas A&M has challenged everything around the rim. They have not made anything easy down low." And if you watch this Ole Miss team, that's kind of how they like to get their offense from too. It's not Duckins from Cisse and Sharp. It's Flanagan on a little guard, back down mid range. It's Morrell that just beat his man on a fast closeout trying to take a pull up mid range. That's kind of the 2-point offense that Ole Miss has, and I don't like that against Texas A&M. Solo Washington, Andy Garcia, these guys are great paint defenders, and that's not really good for Ole Miss. I'm expecting like a lot of contested Flanagan fall away jumpers at the baseline and whatnot. I think this is a bad matchup for Ole Miss offensively, and then I'm not even going to go into the rebounding. It's the best rebounding team against the worst. So I just think, and then also another point, and hey, this is coming from someone that has adopted Ole Miss as resident hype man. This is a Texas A&M team that's finally healthy. How many games have we covered where they either don't have Radford, Washington, or Coleman? Well, they got all three of them now. It seems like the first time all year they have all three of them. So you're getting a fully healthy team now that has been playing down a man pretty much every game at home against a team that doesn't rebound and doesn't shoot a lot of threes. It's just, I've got a nightmare matchup here for Ole Miss.
Yeah, I think Blake made some great points about the shooting away from home that I think might be key in this game. Here's another thing on the other side, though. A&M is so dependent on Wade Taylor for reasons we've gone over. I'm very interested to see how they line up in this one. I mean, they list Taylor at 6 foot. I'm not sure he's quite that tall. Could they put a 6'6" Alan Flanagan on him and just make his looks really difficult? Now, if they do that, they got a 5'11" Jalen Murray who's going to match up with somebody. I don't know if that's a 6'3" Tyrese Radford or who. So there's some strategy there. Like if you go big on Taylor, if Murray's your guy having to guard somebody else, maybe you lose somewhere else. They've also got Matt Morrell who's 6'4". Maybe that's your answer. But I do worry a little bit from A&M's standpoint. Although I guess if it was that easy, somebody would have done it. If you put a taller guy on Taylor, how does that affect things? But I think the rebounding numbers, Ole Miss not playing well from home. Remember, Ole Miss has won a couple of road games, but they're really close. Have gotten blown out in a couple of games. I feel like this is a spot. A&M is a flawed team, but I feel like with some of those rebounding numbers we went over, they might be just good enough to score 60 points, and in this game that might be good enough, Max.
Yeah, I think another angle that we're not talking about is the absence of TJ Caldwell for Ole Miss. Chris Beard said he hopes he can play, but there's no certainty or anything. He was out of the game last time out, and that's a big piece. That's a 6'4", 200-pound sophomore. That's one of their better perimeter defenders. If you don't have him, you're looking at Austin Nunez at 6'2", 170, probably their worst guard defender. So you have a really thin backcourt. I mean, Juju Murray plays 80% of the minutes at point guard at 5'11". So you don't really have. That's why I think it was smart of you, Chris, to mention Flanagan and Morrell maybe guarding Wade Taylor, because Ole Miss is not going to have much success putting Juju Murray or Austin Nunez on him. So I just think this is kind of a bad spot for Ole Miss. And plus they've gotten crushed, I think 27 to Tennessee, 9 to LSU. And then I can't do math, but it looks like 30 against Auburn. They've just been getting crushed on the road. And I haven't seen it yet, hopefully they prove me wrong so I can have some nice stuff to say about Ole Miss. But I'm going A&M here. I think it's a brutal matchup.
Yeah, A&M's not as good as Auburn or Tennessee. So this game feels a lot probably more similar to the LSU game because I do think Ole Miss will have their chances just because I don't know if you're going to trust A&M to just go off offensively. I know they did against Kentucky and such, but this just feels like I said, for some reason to me, this is one of those games that I don't know, may just be a bit of a grind for both teams, but we'll see. Maybe both get hot and it's not the case. So, yeah, I will also pick A&M to complete the 15 pick sweep.
We just did
here.
all the same.
So who's it going to be? I mean, we've ruined everybody, but who is it going to be? Because we all just made the same picks for all 5 of these games.
Yeah, so I guess Georgia and Ole Miss. Congrats, you just won.
Ooh, somebody's done for with our picks, but we'll find out who it is. So
it's been a morning, hasn't it? All right, let's give a. If there's an upset somewhere, where might it be? I mean, Georgia might be the one, I think, because how many road games has Georgia won?
I mean, look, we basically just listed all the reasons why there could be an upset in each of these games. So I don't know if we need to go back through the whole thing, but if we had to pick one, I would pick Georgia.
If I had to pick one, honestly, I would probably pick Missouri. I just think it's that classic hangover from the game of your life type of situation there.
Put him in timeout.
That was my second one.
Oh, you two. Put Lamont Perez putting both of you guys in timeout.
I got to get my revenge.
I'm your favorite son.
Revenge.
Yeah. Not these
What
two.
happened to you and Dennis Gates? Have you two broken up?
Well, I got to win games. Come on.
They're winning
wins
here. They're winning this one.
It's in my contract. I mean, I get paid extra for wins. I'm not getting paid extra right now for wins. So
and the best way to get Dennis Gates to wins is to pick against him. No, I think seriously that the two that I thought of that I think are most likely to win on the road are Georgia and Missouri. Again, by virtue of South Carolina having a letdown. I think the one that I feel most confident about a win is Tennessee. I think A&M Ole Miss is interesting. I know Ole Miss has not been good on the road, but I can find a path because of A&M's shooting difficulties. And then Alabama, I think, is going to win. But again, that's one that I just don't see a blowout. I mean, I could see it, but I could also very much see a close game for reasons we outlined. So, well, we've got to come up with a name for the Southeastern 14 Kiss of Death.
I think that's it. I think it's the Kiss of Death.
Drop it in the comments if you've got a better idea. Maybe we need to come up with a graphic or something every time we do this. If you're not familiar with the Southeastern 14 Kiss of Death, that is when all 3 of us pick against a team and that team goes and wins the game, which has happened a couple of times this year. So
more than a couple.
More than a couple.
Again, I don't know what you're talking about. Jeez. Happens literally every single game slate. So
pretty much.
Hey, what I will say is the home teams had a very good middle of the week. Home teams did very well Tuesday and Wednesday. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah. All right, mailbag edition coming up. About to do that one next. Best way to get that, hit the subscribe button. That costs you nothing. It's just a follow, a free follow. If you liked it, hit the like button, tell a friend. We cover SEC football, basketball, baseball, wall to wall, even in the off season. We're talking football. We'll have baseball content starting probably here in a week or two as we get ready for the season. Hope you're here for it. Don't take us too seriously. We take our work seriously, but not ourselves. For Blake Lovell and Max Barr, I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14, presented by BetOnline.